Hello everybody, welcome into our latest live video. If I can get the video on the screen, there it is. Today it is Friday, the 19th of July, 2024. My name is CareyHolzman. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. A shout out to our friends over at Acronis True Image. Yes, the Acronis True Image name is back. We're going to have Begowden from Acronis join us live on Tuesday, and we'll talk about some of the other changes and what's going on at Acronis, as well as taking any of your questions. If you have questions for Acronis you'd like us to ask, please submit them in the comments below this video, or you can email them to us in time for Tuesday's show. Also, thanks to our friends at RoboForm, as well as VIP CDK Deals. RoboForm is a password manager, and VIP CDK Deals offers discounts on Windows licenses for Windows operating systems and Microsoft Office. And you get 30% off all of the above, Acronis, RoboForm, VIP CDK Deals, using the coupon codes and links in the video notes below this video. Today, we are going with the standard part 2 of a normal build. We usually do builds in 2 parts. If you're new here and you're wondering, anytime you see a build, it will almost always be in 2 parts, minimum. So depending on the complexity of the build, most builds are relatively straightforward. We'll prep the motherboard in part 1. That's a good 2 hours there. And then installing the board and the power supply and hooking it all up, that's another 2-hour show with testing. So, and all in all, typically two parts is a normal build video. Now with that, thank you to our friends joining us, all the members hanging out in the chat room. Good to see everybody. A couple of contributions have already come in, so a shout out and a thank you to these very generous folks. Tom Jackson with $7.77 says, "This is for funding Studio D in Michigan." We got to get Studio C done first. Thank you so much. That is my ultimate goal, is to get back to Michigan. Gregory Howard with a $20 super chat says, "Hello everybody, this little coffee PC I have, I've never turned it off. It runs like gangbusters. Keep up the good work. Carey, hi Carey and Marlena. The temperature here in southwestern Ohio is 75 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's a clear day today." Well, thanks for the update, Gregory. Gregory got the Sega Tech. Who made that case? I always mix up Rasian Tech, Sega Tep, and Johnsbow. Is that Johnsbow? Can't remember, but it was a little machine, mini ATX, I believe, with the glass that was rounded on the sides. Beautiful little machine. And I'm glad to hear he's enjoying it. Craig Casabona with a $20 super chat. Thank you for that, Craig, as always. And yeah, hello to Mark and Daryl. There's Johnny and Eddie, Dennis, Kine, and Scott, and 3D Everything, Mark Staley Sr. There's Mark Baggett, Luke Greenia joining us from Vermont. Chris Johnson says hello. Bajan Guy saying hello. David Graham and Bradley Morris and Kurt Schlegel, as well as Essential Working Too Hard, all joining us saying hello. There's Mark Gaines and Ron Barnish. So welcome in, guys. Jason H88 and Dwayne Blackwelder, Michael MacArthur, Eugene Hidalgo, Jose Lopez and William Bird, all joining us and saying hello, along with Captain Blinsky and Andy Kane. And Jose Lopez with a $1 super chat contribution. Thank you, Jose. And to all of you, thank you so much for supporting the channel so we can continue to make videos that the public can watch for free and offer nothing in return but grief. All right, so we've got the motherboard all prepped from last time, as you recall. And today it's time to put the board into the case along with the power supply. Now, I've not done any research or rehearsal or script writing with regards to knowing anything about this case, other than it's Musetex or Musetex, however they pronounce that. Again, I will say I'm not a fan of when you have to secure your PCIe cards that are internal on the outside of the case. Typically, things that are on the outside of the case, like a power supply, sticks out. Obviously, you would want to secure that from the outside. But when it comes to the internal cards being installed, The idea that the screws would be on the outside of the case, to me, is a sign of cheapness. It's a sign that, for whatever reason, you don't see this on more expensive brand name cases. You'll typically find this kind of design on the AliExpress stuff, the cheaper, less expensive, not as well built cases. So that's not to say that all cases that feature this outward design are cheap, but typically that's an indicator for me in the industry. I don't believe I've ever sold a customer a case that had the screws on the outside. That would be a very sincere security concern, as well as making it a little more difficult to work on the machine when you have to work inside and outside at the same time underneath a desk at an office. Speaking of which, there was a big IT outage worldwide, as far as I know, a company called CrowdStrike, which, if you're a home user, would not necessarily affect you or your machine, but might affect your ability to call 911 for an emergency, to go to the hospital, to pretty much do business with almost any major company. They were all down across the United States anyway. And I mean, nearly all Fortune 500 companies were down and may still be down due to a bad update. CrowdStrike it's a service that's supposed to prevent hacking so that, your company doesn't go down. They had a bad update. And instead of releasing the update in stages, they just released it to everybody at the same time. And so everybody went down. Home users don't use CrowdStrike, so it wouldn't impact you personally, but it might impact your ability to call the airline, to buy an airline ticket, or get on a flight and fly somewhere. So when you're in IT and your job is you have to respond and react and diagnose and repair this because the entire airline is shut down, or the hospital is shut down, or the 911 dispatch center is shut down, or any big major corporation has gone down and they can't help their customers on a Friday, you're going to have a very stressful Friday. And a lot of people are counting on you. And that's what I try and bring to my YouTube channel, is that perspective. An enthusiast, it doesn't make a difference in an enthusiast's life if there's a bad update that takes down Fortune 500 companies simultaneously on a Friday. It has no impact on their, maybe it's inconvenient that they wanted to, get on an airplane and now the airplane's grounded until it's fixed. But I would love to see more people working in the industry create YouTube content of the subject matter they want to talk about, so that the home users get an idea of the oversimplicity they have more often than not over the complexities and stresses in everyday life that we take for granted. As consumers, we go and we buy things and we don't think about how that all works and how much work goes into keeping it working. We don't typically wait till it breaks. There's ongoing maintenance and upgrades and updates that have to happen all the time. And if any of that goes wrong, then the consequences are going to be long days, stressful days, and possibly losing your job if they find out that you weren't able to get them up and running fast enough, or you caused a problem. So even though that wasn't your intention, this is something enthusiasts and home users don't have with regards to consequences, liability, or responsibility. And this is a prime example in real world life. It's all over the news on every news station across the country. This was a massive, massive impact to all businesses here in the United States that are large businesses, and a lot of Fortune 500 companies utilize CrowdStrike. So what an amazing and unexpected event that was. In the meantime, you still have to protect yourself from the people trying to harm you, right? The hackers, the bad guys, the scam artists. And then on top of that, you get bad updates. So in the world of IT, there's a lot of work. There's no way IT's going away. But for home users, it's very different. Not better or worse, just different. All right. And let's see, just take a look here in the chat. CrowdStrike said, this is from Dwayne Blackwelder, CrowdStrike said it was not a cyber incident. But when you push out a bad update, what's the difference? I've never heard of a company releasing a major update without doing pre-testing. Now, we've had updates from companies that did not do proper quality control. If you recall, Malwarebytes did that, crashed a lot of our customers' computers. We've seen that with other major software companies from, for example, Intuit, as well as other antivirus and security companies and large software platforms, including Microsoft, where the testing wasn't thorough. When they say it wasn't a cyber incident, I think you're missing a word. They're saying it wasn't a cyber terrorism incident. In other words, it was not a third-party actor intrusion into the network to create harm. So they did use the word cyber, but I do believe there is another word after the word cyber. Cyber would mean it's on the internet. So clearly this was a cyber-related event, but not a cyber terrorism or a hostile cyber attack. So it was just an innocent update that was flawed. And I imagine somebody's probably going to lose their job over it once the ocean settles back down and becomes calm waters again, and there's going to be meetings and they're going to find out how did this happen. I got a feeling someone's losing their job, because that's a major embarrassment, and their stock price took a massive hit today as a result. A lot of people sold off their stock. So that company, it just cost them a ton of money, a bunch of negative press. A company most people never heard of before today are now hearing about it in a negative way. And yeah, there's going to be some consequences to this internally, I can assure you. But be that as it may, for today's build, with the Musetex K2 case we've got here in black, I wanted to avoid a liquid cooler because I don't want to, this case has 5 fans in it already, 3 across the top and 2 there in the back. And for us to put a liquid cooler in it, we'd have to remove those fans and install our own fans. And then we're going to lose the RGB, or, we could have trouble synchronizing it. So, well, it's advertised that it can take a cooler, and it can. Why buy parts that you're not going to use? Save money. Buy only. It would be like ordering a big meal and just eating one part of it and throwing the rest of it away. If all you wanted was that one little part, you could just order that one little part a la carte. So if you're building your own machine, a la carte is the way to do it. When you get a package deal where they're going to include a power supply and the case, and unless that's exactly what you need, great deal. If it isn't, you're likely not saving any money. You're likely spending more than you needed to than if you would have done more a la carte rather than bundled deals. The bundled deals only are a deal if you need everything in the bundle. The minute one thing in the bundle is something you're not going to use, the deal's off. So, all right, let's get the case open now for the first time and see what it looks like inside. Thank you to William Denton with a $9.99 super chat. All right, so our typical glass removal with the screws. Sometimes the glass will pop off, or you push in on it, or there's a screw in the back and the glass will slide in, hook into the front. Because the front is also glass, I'm guessing this was probably the best way to secure it, was on the sides. Now, I haven't seen a case with glass that's secured on the sides in a while. I don't have a problem with it. It's just something I'm noticing that was like a trend, and then they kind of stopped doing it, and now it's back. At least it's being utilized here. All right, now that should just pull right off of there. Yeah, this is just a piece of glass. There's no metal on it, no framing, no hooks. All right, so this also is an indicator of a cheaper case, right? Because it's much cheaper to produce a piece of glass than to have to add any framing around it. And whether or not something's cheap doesn't necessarily make it bad. It's just about setting your expectations and understanding why some cases cost less than other cases. A lot of it has to do with the quality of materials that is used, as well as how thoughtful the case was in design for working inside of it. What can it accommodate? For example, well, they might promote it accommodates a liquid cooler. It's not exactly convenient to put one in. You can, it's possible. But if you really want to take advantage of a case like this, your best bet is if you're buying something cheap, keep it cheap. Otherwise, don't buy a cheap case only to spend more money on it to take out fans and put in the liquid cooler when you could have bought a nicer case made of better material that already allows for the easy installation without any further pre-preparation to put a cooler in. That's just an example. Cable management will be another example. Let's see if they've given us any cable management tracks back here. Yes, they have. And this is a nice surprise, especially on the lesser cost cases. You often don't get much in the way of cable management consideration. But here they've given us these Velcro ties, and they just loop through the little bridges here. You don't get any tracks like you do with NZXT, and you don't get a whole lot of space for your cables to be thicker. Like, that's pretty much it. Right at the edge of these fans is pretty much the amount of space you've got for cabling. So I'm going to estimate that's about 3/4 of an inch. That's not terrible, and it's not great. I'd like to see a full inch, inch and a half. It's not as though you could ever have too much room back here. However, with the addition of these fans, it helps create the idea of a track. And with that NZXT, with a more expensive case, not only is it built of better materials, thicker steel than this, you would not have these screws on the outside. Your glass would not have holes through the glass where it's so visible. You would not have fans installed that you would have to remove necessarily to put a liquid cooler in. And you would pay more for that case than you would for this one. So that doesn't make this case bad, but it helps to understand what the price points are and why. Generally speaking, you're going to pay less, you're going to get less, but you may just need less. Just because you can pay more to get more doesn't mean that holds any benefit or value to you personally. But if you have unrealistic expectations and you think that this case is just as good as for less money, they're not. They're very different. So, all right, it might be just as good as for your purposes, but the price difference between them was only like $40. So for me personally, I'd rather deal with the name brand cases. However, this isn't terrible. It's not, you know, like Kadires. When we looked at those are the worst cases I've ever worked on. And they're expensive, which adds insult to injury. Musetex, you know, their cases are somewhere in the middle. They're not at the low end, they're not at the high end. They kind of sit somewhere in the middle, which for most people is probably good enough. It just really depends on your expectations and how particular you are. So in the box, we've got, or in the case rather, we've got this box. That's going to have all of our mounting hardware in it. We've got an instruction manual here. And yeah, that's all that's in there. They've given us all of 5 cable ties. Yay. And then we've got the screws for adding our hardware to the case. Up on the top of the case, this is good. We've got 2 USB Type A ports and a USB Type C. I like this. A lot of times the cheaper cases only give you 1 USB port, even though to wire that up takes 2 USB port cables. So what a shame that you have to use 2 USB ports just to get one, and you never get the other one back. And that's just a cheap case design. They'll say, well, it saved money by putting one in. No, it cost you money because you just lost a second USB port you paid for on your motherboard that you cannot use. You cannot use it. So there's no reason every case should not have 2 USB ports. To say it's a cost-cutting measure would be like buying a car with 3 tires on it. Why does the car only have 3 tires? Well, it's a cost-saving measure. Okay, but the car doesn't perform well with 3 tires. Anyway, we got a reset button. That's good. You don't see many of those anymore. And you get the power button. So one of the advantages, I suppose, of going back a little bit of old school probably is the technology's cheaper, right? When they first came out with the glass panels that would use the screws. That was how they initially came out. Now today that's considered a bit old-fashioned, but that probably makes this much cheaper to make. And reset buttons are often considered old-fashioned. A lot of modern cases don't have them. I'm not against old-fashioned. I like the idea of having the reset button, even though we barely use it these days. But it's going away. So it's nice to see they've kept that alive. And yeah, we've got a cage down here for two 3.5-inch drives. We've got a spot here for two 2.5-inch drives. We've got our pre-installed fans here that are RGB that are going to be blowing air out the case towards you. And then we've got our 3 fans up at the top, and those fans are blowing air out this way. And then we've got a fan here in the back that's blowing air out this way. So we've got air going out, out, and out. And that's not necessarily a good design. These fans here will actually impede the airflow in most cases from these fans working properly. However, because we don't have any forward ventilation on this case, this is all solid piece of glass, where's it drawing the air in from? So that means, to me, the only place this can draw air is from this side right here. Because this is, you think about it, when a magician does a trick where they're going to be submerged in water, it's always a glass aquarium. We effectively have an aquarium here, and that blocks all the air out. So the only way that this case can breathe is going to be, well, it can't be through the top because we're pushing air out away. It can't be from the back because we're pushing out air away. So it's not going to be from the power supply because that's an enclosed system. It's going to draw the air into the power supply and then out. That airflow is just right here. It doesn't go any further. It doesn't go into the case. In the power supply, out the back of the power supply. So if these are blowing air out, and this is blowing air out, and this is blowing air out, where's the input air? Where's the air coming in? And so far as I can tell, it isn't. There's nowhere for the air to come in. We've got ventilation here, but that's the worst possible place because it's not going to get that far into the case before it's sucked right back out into that fan. It'll come in and go right back out. And this is going to create a vacuum. It's going to draw air into every hole in the case that it can suck air into, meaning the back of the board. And once again, if it comes into the back, it'll turn around and get sucked right out the top. It won't get very far into the case before one of these fans grabs it. So if we were trying to create a vacuum, that's a good design for a vacuum. But it is a very inexpensive and attractive case. Is it the best airflow? Obviously not. Is it the best secure design? No. Does it have the best cable management? Not at all. But is it the worst? It's not the worst either. So overall, unless we're building something that's going to run extremely hot, most case design regarding airflow is irrelevant to most users. It's only the extreme enthusiasts who really, I would say a lot of people care about it, but in most situations, it's a pointless thing to care about. It's redundant and negligible unless you have a reason to justify that requirement, which most people do not. And I think if somebody was that much of an enthusiast, they wouldn't spend so little on a case, that they would understand the reasoning behind the importance of getting something quality, which has the higher technical minutia requirements that they expect, and they understand they're going to spend more money for that. It's the home user that can often be misled and not be taught properly why these cases are different prices. And oftentimes it is inferred that the cheaper cases are less desirable. But that's not necessarily true. If your expectations are that you understand what you're buying and what your needs are and you're okay with it, that's great. And that's all we're trying to establish here. I can't tell you whether or not this will meet your needs or your budget or your expectations, but I can tell you how much it costs and how to work on it and where it falls short compared to more expensive cases or even cheaper cases where it's better. And at the end of the day, it's up to you to decide, is that all I need? Or do I need to spend more to have the best, even though once it's all built in the case, I'm not going back in it for a long time? Or maybe you plan on going back in it every other day. So that's not my decision to make. All right, let's go ahead and lay this flat here so I can get the motherboard installed, and we'll start there. First of all, I want to look at this pre-installed standoffs. You know, we've had an issue with that in the past. Now this, I'm happy to say, appears to have the 9 standoffs in the standard ATX position. 3 across the top, 3 across the middle, 3 across the bottom. And I think this motherboard, yes, will match that. 3 across top, 3 across the middle, 3 across the bottom. So we don't have to position or reposition or install any additional standoffs. Now that is typical with a name brand case, a more expensive case, like NZXT or Corsair. You very rarely have to move any standoffs unless you're putting a different size motherboard in. So if we have an ATX case and we want to put a micro ATX board in it, we might have to make some modifications. But an ATX case should, in my opinion, have the standoffs pre-installed from the factory for an ATX motherboard. And a micro ATX case should have the standoffs pre-installed for a micro ATX motherboard. So we've got our I/O shield already attached to this motherboard. I'm kind of curious what's holding this front piece of glass on. Let me turn this way here for a second. That kind of looks like nothing's holding it in. Can't really tell. No, it's secured in there somehow. Oh. It looks like there are screws. There is a metal frame right across the top and a screw on the inside. So this is not going to come off easily. And that's okay. I didn't need it to, but I thought if it did, it would make getting my hands in there a little easier. But, you know, that's not normal. I'm not accustomed to getting it easier. I wouldn't complain if it was easier. But no, it looks like that is secured in. And there are rivets on this side of it. So you have to go in from the front, and the fans would be in the way, which means the first fan would have to be removed just to get a screwdriver in there to take this front piece of glass. So again, it's an inexpensive case. They don't have all the conveniences that a more expensive case would likely offer you in that sense, but it's not important to me. So I pointed out just so you know, and you can value whether or not that's important to you or not. Another thing cheaper cases don't offer you is that little post on one of the standoffs to help you keep the motherboard centered. So all of the standoffs are the same, meaning that board is free to wobble around. And it just makes your motherboard install a little more difficult. You know, a little standoff with the post probably costs a quarter of a penny, and they couldn't be bothered to put it in. Maybe they don't understand the value of it. Maybe they just don't know. Maybe it's ignorance. But it does make installing a motherboard kind of like how we used to do it like back in the day. Now we can install it so much easier. You pop it in, it locks it in place. You just put the screws in. Now the screws are what locks it in place. So you've got to align it forward and backward and tilt it until you get them all lined up because you don't have anything there to hold it for you. So again, there's another sign of a less expensive, I say cheaper. I'm afraid cheaper isn't necessarily meant that it's less quality. It's just cheaper in the sense that it costs less, and the reason it costs less. These things go hand in hand. So I don't know which screws. It looks like we've got a bunch of fan screws for some reason. I don't know where else you could add fans to this, but they've given us to them, and given them to us anyway. Got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's not going to be motherboard screws because we need 9 of those. So in this bag, I guess we're going to be finding our motherboard screws here. So I don't know. I'm going to guess, again, these long screws are for adding fans, but I just don't know where you could add a fan on this. It's completely populated. Maybe you put 4 fans across the bottom if you want RGB shooting up. But that's really an aesthetic. It will not offer you any additional cooling. What it will do is add more dust and debris and basically turn your computer into a large vacuum cleaner. Adds a lot of noise as well, and it also will consume more power from your power supply, costing you more money to run this computer. And for some people, that doesn't matter, and for other people, it's a pretty big deal. So, you know, if you want to have something that looks super pretty, you'll spend money for that. If you want something to be super efficient, you'll save money with that, especially over time. And that has nothing to do with performance, security, or reliability. That would be the same regardless. So we're going to have screws to mount 2.5-inch drives and 3.5-inch drives. And then we're also going to have screws for mounting the motherboard. And I just don't know which. And they've given us no spare standoffs. There's, again, something else that a cheaper case won't give you those considerations because it would cost more. So the question is, which one of these is for our motherboard install? I'm going to try with what appears to be the 3.5-inch drive screws. These are a shorter coarse thread. And each manufacturer, more or less, it makes this up as they go. There's no sense of rhyme or reason as to which size screw or thread they use on their standoffs. That's why it's important to use the screws that come with your case to mount the hardware in your case and to save those screws for any work you have to do later, because trying to find another screw that will fit might prove to be a challenge. And even if it does, it may not match. So you might have a silver screw, a black screw, or even the wrong style of screw that ends up stripping out the thread. So I'm having a very difficult time lining this up onto the standoffs. There's no guides. And of course, it's very dark inside of this case. So let me grab a flashlight. There won't be much for me to show you guys at this point because I can barely see it myself and I'm standing right in front of it. Wow, I was way off. Way off. Is this the right screw? See, that's the other problem. Then I've got to experiment with 3 different kinds of screws here to figure out which of the 3 is supposed to go in here. And my initial reaction is these coarse threaded screws, they get started, but they won't go any further. The fine threaded screw, which would normally be used on a 2.5-inch SSD or a CD or a DVD drive, if these are too thin, they'll just fall right in. Let's see, this is turning, but is it actually tightening? It is tightening. So this case is going to use, let me see if I can show these to you close up. I'm going to show you the 3 different screws we've got to pick from here. And this is, again, a less expensive case is not necessarily going to tell you this. Although I haven't looked into documentation. It might say what these screws are for. Quite often they only tell you what the size of the screw is and how many you should have in the package, not necessarily where they go. So we've got 3 screws, all different, in the bag. This is your standard, which one? This one right here. That's your standard, ordinary, everyday hex head, common case screw. And we're not using that for anything as far as I can tell. The next 2 I've got left is a fine threaded screw right there and a coarse threaded screw. That coarse thread is typically used for motherboard standoffs and 3.5-inch mechanical drives. But sometimes the motherboard standoffs want this screw here, which is a finer thread with the round head on it, which is typically used on CD drives, solid state drives, and every once in a while for mounting the motherboard. So it could go either way on that. In fact, I've seen the standard case screws used on some motherboard mounting. Each manufacturer does it however they feel like it, for whatever reasoning they have. There is no industry standard for that. Now, normally I would not be putting a screw here in the center of the board. That's usually where a standoff where the post is at to help us keep the board in place and locked in. And we just have to accommodate. So if you're building machines all the time like I am, there's a certain set of expectations that I have with regards to what this process is. And when we change the manufacturer and we go with something different, it means a lot of what we did and why we did it with other cases that we've used, that you've seen commonly, whether it's from Be Quiet, NZXT, Corsair, they're almost all the same. But the minute we go to these knockoff brands or these brands that are lesser known, they often make these changes and they're not necessarily highlighted in other reviews. On if you have any familiarity at all with other cases, especially big name brands, and you for the very first time go to one of the cheaper cases from the lesser known brands, be prepared to forget what you know and start over again. The screws you've learned to use and the way you've learned to mount the parts changes. And that's to be expected. And some people might enjoy that, and some people might be really frustrated with that. So you've got to be flexible and open-minded to say this is going to be a new experience, and the processes that I've grown accustomed to will not apply in this case. And that either helps you grow as an individual and expand your knowledge and experience, or it's going to really upset you and make you not want to ever do it again. People usually fall into one of those two categories. So screwdriver is not quite long enough. That's why I always use this one. Because as I'm trying to get down to the hole in the motherboard against this back panel and the power supply shroud, you really need a longer handled driver. It doesn't have to be automatic. Just to get in there and reach it without the driver handle getting in the way. All right, now I should be able to tighten all these down now that we've got them all started. Okay, now the board is secured so I can lift the case back up and show you. It helps that, you know, we just coincidentally happen to have a black board, and that was not intentional, but sometimes you get lucky, and there you go. So now we got to put a power supply in. Now, I don't like cases that have non-removable power supply shrouds because it limits my ability to put the power supply in. Normally, when I put a power supply in, I grab it from both sides, and I straighten it out, and then I lock it in back here. But without any access to this side, this is in my way, then I only have this space down here to reach my hand in and hold the power supply towards the back of the case, while also keeping it straight, and also hoping my cables don't hit the hard drive cage. So at that point, it gets really, really frustrating because it'd be very easy for a manufacturer to include a couple of screws to take the power supply shroud out, or at the very least, a portion of the power supply shroud. We've seen that on other, granted, more expensive cases, where you can remove that And again, if you're only building one computer and you're not going to build another one again for months or years, this is not a big deal. If you have to build 10 computers and you have 3 days to do it, and this is what they give you to work with, I don't think you're going to make it. Like, I don't think your time budget is not enough. So you will work harder and it will take you longer. And again, when we deal in scale and we deal in, the sheer number of computers we're building, things that are more labor intensive are not saving any money. In other words, whatever you saved on those parts, you're then having to charge back in labor time. So there is a balance of what's optimal for the investment of time as well as the investment of parts. You can spend too much on the parts and you can spend too little on the parts. And when you're in business, this is something you have to balance out in order to generate a profit. Verusian Klustian with a $2 super chat. Thank you for that, Verusian. Peter from Amsterdam with a €1 super chat. Thank you, Peter. David Graham wants to know if I've ever considered investing in a headlamp. Well, this channel, David, has been around since 2008. And since 2008, I think I've had 3 or 4 headlamps. When I look at the camera, let's say I was wearing a headlamp, and I'm going to show you why I don't wear a headlamp. If this was my headlamp, and I'm looking down so I can see, but then I look up to talk to you guys, do you think that's going to be something people are going to like? So no, I don't wear a headlamp. Besides that, I look like a goof, more so than normal, having a headlamp on when I'm not using it. So I find it where a headlamp might be practical if I wasn't going to shine it in somebody's eyes while talking. If I'm working alone, I even don't wear a headlamp then, to be honest. It messes up what little hair I have. I'll grab a flashlight. But it wouldn't help you guys see any better. It would actually be worse. So that's why I don't use one. But I've had viewers send them to me. I think I bought one, didn't like it, and some viewers sent it to me. Here, I'm going to send you something. And that's why I've told people don't send me things anymore without checking with me first, because you might be wasting your money. So I think I had 3 headlamps sent to me that I won't use. And, I know the intention was good. It's just, they just wasted their money. And that's why we don't use them. So hopefully that makes sense for you. Marlena says, I'm already enough of a shining star. No, I think you're confusing my blacklight paint. What do they call it? All right. Anyway, let's get the power supply put in. So for the power supply, the folks at Be Quiet had sent us a while back this straight power 12. This is a 750 watt power supply. Now, the reason I'm putting such a large power supply in here is because the person who gets this computer might want to add a graphics card to it and turn this into a really nice gaming rig. And if so, they're going to need more power. Also, this isn't costing us anything because Be Quiet sent it for review, and all the more reason to use it. So the stars aligned on this one as well. I don't have any issue with Be Quiet branded coolers, cases, or power supplies. I think they're very aggressively priced and much higher quality at that price point than some of the Chinese manufacturers. I think Be Quiet is Austrian or German. And so I would expect their prices to be higher, when in fact they're actually quite a bit lower than other similar quality brands. So definitely worth consideration. If you like big and heavy stuff, Be Quiet's the way to go. I also don't think I've ever had a Be Quiet power supply fail on me yet, although I've only used about a half dozen of them. I like my regular razor blade better than that. Nick Caffrey with a €5 super chat says, I've been watching at 2x speed to catch up. Hey to Carey and Mara in chat. 60 degrees Fahrenheit here in West Cork and raining. 60 degrees Fahrenheit is 16 degrees Celsius. Oh, that sounds refreshing. I'll take it. Send some over here. All right, let me bring this back over. This is big and heavy. So we'll set it down here and give you a proper unboxing. We have a box in a box. All right. Documentation. Look how well they packaged that. That's the other thing you'll get from name brands is just overall better packing materials. So when you're buying the cheaper stuff, it's also packed cheaper. It's all cheap all around, or it's not usually. It's not usually half of one and half of the other in most hardware as far as cases and power supplies go. They're typically hand in hand. So let's see, what is this? We've got some zip ties. Boy, they've given us as many zip ties with the power supply as they've given us with the case. We've got 4 screws there for the power supply, which we also have duplicates of that came with the case, so they're both the same. We've got our power cable. We've got 2 sets of modular cables here. We're on each side of the power supply. And then we have the power supply itself, and then that's all there is in the box. And a little silica gel packet just fell out of there. Now, I don't understand why Be Quiet puts all of their plugs on vertically instead of horizontally. This can make it very difficult if you have to reach into a case with a power supply shroud to add a cable, and you need to add the cable over here, but these cables over here are sticking up and in your way. So this is what you're looking at. How do you get around that? Versus horizontal cables are easier to access. So I'm not exactly sure. I've talked to them about it. I'm not sure my voice has been heard. My question to Be Quiet was, apart from being different, what is the advantage of putting your connectors on vertically? Because I can tell you what the disadvantage is. And the other thing that concerned me about Be Quiet, and again, my voice has not been heard, is these little bars right here that are supposed to protect the fan, they're too far apart. If you were to mount this power supply in upside down, which in some cases, like a lot of Thermaltake cases, they don't have any ventilation at the bottom of the case. So these power supplies are designed to go one way or the other. And the preference is to have the fan down. The fan is going to draw air in, okay? But if we mount this power supply, as we perfectly can to the standard, in this orientation, so our motherboard is above it, and we drop a screw, that screw will fall right inside of your power supply, which is a high voltage circuit board. Look at the size of the capacitors in there. And there's a really good chance it's going to go kablooey, like a very loud firecracker sound and fire. All because a screw fell inside. Now, obviously, if you follow my safety recommendations and never work on the computer with the power plugged into it, that's not going to happen. As long as you're aware you dropped a screw in, the only way you're going to get that screw out, so far as I can tell, is to remove the power supply, hold it upside down, and shake it until that screw falls out. And if it doesn't, you're going to have to physically open the power supply, locate it, and remove it before you plug it in and turn it on and find out, whoopsie, I guess I didn't get it, or I forgot, or I didn't notice a screw dropped in there. These should be much tighter together. And if you look at other power supply manufacturers, from NZXT to Corsair to EVGA, they're not this wide for a reason, and I've pointed that out to them. So my question was, what's the advantage, apart from being different from everybody else, that justifies this danger? And what's the advantage, apart from being different, to having these plugs vertical instead of horizontal? Because vertically, they're very difficult. Imagine, if we picture this, this goes in the case like this. Okay? So all the way at the edge of the shroud is where your main power cables for your board are going to go on. These right here. They're going to go right against this piece of metal right here. How do you reach that? Let's say your power supply dies and you need to take the power supply out and send it in for warranty. The benefit of having a modular power supply is you can unplug all the cables without having to undo anything else. Pull the power supply out just like I'm holding it in my hand and send it back for RMA. They send you a replacement, you just plug it back in. Well, how are you going to do that if the plugs are all the way against this and this is not removable and these are all vertical? So you better install them in the right order. You better start at the back and work your way to the front. Otherwise, I don't know how you're going to get around the cables in the front to work your way to the back. It's just a dumb design. That doesn't mean it's a bad power supply or a bad value, but I don't see any advantage to this sacrifice other than we don't want to do things the way everybody else does it. And I'm all for that if that way is more efficient, superior, safer, it's more logical, it flows better. This doesn't flow through any logic other than nobody else does it like this, so that's why we'll do it. And I see that logic with Be Quiet products, and it frustrates me because it seems pointless, unnecessary, and frustrating to have to work with it under certain circumstances where they're vulnerable. Be Quiet is vulnerable because of their different design without offering any benefit. That's the biggest complaint I have with them. The quality of materials, the workmanship, it's all good stuff. The value you get for the money, right on. But this idea that we're going to do it different for no other reason than because nobody else does it this way, it doesn't seem to occur to them why nobody else does it that way. Like the thought never occurs. There's a benefit to doing it the way everybody else is. That's why they do it that way. And there's a punishment or a risk when you change that to go to something different that offers you absolutely zero benefit. I have asked them and they have not given me a straight answer. So as far as I'm concerned, they don't have an answer that I'm dead on with my assumption. And it's just because no one else does it that way. And they do it with pretty much all the products. Their liquid coolers put the pump in the lines, which is just ugly. It doesn't make the pump bad or a bad value. It's just ugly. Their cases will have hard drive trays that stick out through the glass window. Like you can see them when nobody's really using hard drives anymore and you can't really remove them or it leaves a great big hole there. Or you have to buy them separately. You get like 2, but there's a space for 8 and you have to buy the other 6 individually. What? But it's a great quality case and it's made of good material and it's a fantastic price. Why do I want to see the hard? Why aren't they hidden down below the power supply shroud? Why would I put these ugly mechanical drives, which may not even color match, right up here in the front of the case? And then why would you only limit me to 2 of them when you have 6 or 8 slots? That's what frustrates me with Be Quiet. It doesn't flow with any logic. But good value, good materials, great quality. I don't have any issue with the Be Quiet cooler's installation method or with their ability to cool or be reliable. I just don't like the pump in the lines. It just looks ugly. It's unsightly, in my opinion. If you don't know what I'm referring to, you can look at some of our past videos where we featured the Be Quiet coolers, and you'll see this big square box that the lines run into, and then out of that into the radiator. So the big square box sticks right out here where you can see it. It's just ugly. Remember, that's the box that's got to have the wires going to it for powering the pump. So instead of putting the pump on the block, or instead of putting the pump on the radiator, they put it right in between the lines. I don't get it. I'm just catching up with the chat here for a second. Shamim says he's using a Be Quiet power supply. He's never had any issues. Yeah, again, neither have I. I just don't understand the design choices. Okay, so let's spin this around this way. Now, for this motherboard, we need just power for the motherboard and for the CPU. And all the rest of these cables we will not need. Oh, hold on. I think we're going to need a SATA connector for these fans, maybe. That's ARGB. So how do the fans get power? I don't know. Okay, front port umbilicals, USB, the two USB 3 Type A's there. This is our front port audio. That's our USB 3.1 Type C. Power switch, reset switch, power LED, hard drive LED. So we have all four. And then finally, how do we power these fans? Oh, we just have a standard single fan header that goes on the board. Is that it? One fan header is going to power 5 fans? You know, the voltage coming out of the motherboard for that fan header is not intended for 5 fans. It's a little kludgy. But at least we can run. So the good and the bad of that is that all 5 fans are going to run at the same speed, but that speed is controlled by your motherboard BIOS. But, sorry, 6 fans. The fans that blow out towards you guys, the fans that blow out towards the top, and the single fan that blows out the back should all run independently. In other words, these 2 fans right here should be plugged into a separate fan header. These fans up here should be plugged into a separate fan header. And the fan in the back should be plugged into a separate fan header. And then your motherboard can say, it's hot here, we'll turn these fans up. But it's not hot back here, so these fans don't need to crank up. But by plugging it into one fan header, if any area of this board gets hot, well, let me rephrase. If the area for that fan header gets hot, all the fans will crank up together, even if they don't need to. The power draw to power 6 fans through one fan header is not what the motherboard was designed to do. Even powering more than one fan on a fan header, it's not designed to do that. And you can split it to 2 and it's not really a problem. But the minute you go beyond 2, and then on top of that, they're all going to operate identically. Now, if we have 3 fans across the top, it makes sense to me all 3 fans should run at the same rotation. Wouldn't make sense for the one fan here to run faster, or this fan to run faster than that fan. It might look a little weird. That is just bizarre. Very strange. And that implies the people who design the cases don't necessarily have an education in thermodynamics or airflow. In fact, Corsair even had one of their employees design a case when I went to CES, and I asked him what degree he has in computer case design, and he said he didn't have a college degree. He just designed it, and Corsair built it and sold it. And he was just a regular employee. So I want you to know there's nothing that stops you right now from designing your own case, regardless of your education, and having it made and selling it. You would not be violating any laws in doing that. There is no quality control requirement, nor is there any sort of safety requirement. It's just a metal case. You make it any way you want. Give it no airflow, give it all airflow, make it all glass. Doesn't matter. There are no rules or regulations in that regard. And because of that lack of oversight, the reason I bring all of this up is that you understand that, well, you know, if they make cases, they must be okay. No, absolutely not. The people designing the cases may have absolutely zero education. It is not a requirement or a prerequisite, and nor does the case have to pass any tests. So when a big company like Corsair just lets one of their employees without any proper education design a case, I lose a lot of respect for them. You want somebody working on your car that has no experience as a mechanic? Do you want a doctor diagnosing you that has no experience or education as a doctor? Why would this be any different? All right, so this fan header, this is a 4-pin fan header, and I want to get it out of the way. So let's see if we can get that installed. Looks like the closest one I've got is over here. And so I have just plugged that in. You can see my finger right there. Because once I get the power supply in, that's going to be once I get the power supply in here, it's going to be very hard to access the cable management holes up above the power supply. Again, because the shroud doesn't come off. So you do have to work around the shroud. It will not work around you. With regards to hooking the cables up, we better do that now. So we need just the motherboard power cables and the CPU power cable. That's it. So this one we can install now before we put the power supply in. And then we need our EPS or CPU power cable, which is not in this bundle. I don't know why Be Quiet did that either. When you keep those two cables together, all they gave us was the 24-pin and a bunch of SATA connectors. So the organization here of these bundles is not logical to me. But maybe it's because no one else does it that way, I guess. In fact, you don't normally get two bundles. You normally just get one bundle. So that's something else Be Quiet has chosen to do differently than everybody else, which doesn't seem to have any benefit to it. But it is what it is. So we have to open both bundles in order to get the two mandatory cables that all motherboards require. It's not like you have an option. You will have to open both bundles, look through them, and then find it. And, you know, they would have been doing a service for their customers if they would have separated out the power for the CPU from the power from the GPU, because they're very similar from the untrained eye. So I would have separated those into different bundles. This power supply also has the new power connector that graphics cards, the latest graphics cards use. That is an option. It's nice to see that they've included this. So these say VGA on them. I thought it was CPU power. See, it even confuses me. At first glance, it looks like CPU power. Okay, here is our CPU power. And then they give us two regular PCI Express power connectors for a graphics card, and then a third PCI Express graphics card for the new standard, which is called, what do they call that? The PCIe 5.0 standard. You know. What is this for? This looks like a CPU power cable. This is another graphics cable. That's our second one. That's regular. Okay, so now my question is, what's going on with that number P8 cable? What is that for? Let me wrap these up so they don't fall on the floor. And let me take a closer look at what P8 is. You see, they've given us, does it say P8 on it as well? This one doesn't say anything. Guess good luck. They've given us these two split connectors here that together can form an 8-pin. And then they've given us another one that looks nearly identical, but this one says P8. Is this the same connector? I believe it's the same connector on this side. And I think it's the same connector on this side, except that this one has the two put together already, or maybe you can't even separate them. So some motherboards, like this board here, can use a 4 and an 8. Some boards will use 2 8s. Some board will use 2 4s as 1 8. I don't know what they're thinking. You want to talk about adding unnecessary and avoidable confusion. Why not just give me 2 of these so I can put them together? What is the point of having them put together? And why does this one say P8 and this one says not? This one says CPU. So in theory, that's what you got to use for your CPU power. This one says P8. And I don't have anything called P8. I don't know what that's for. But that sure as heck looks like CPU power to me. I don't know what this cable's for. It is bizarre. I've never seen a manufacturer ever do this. I've never heard a manufacturer refer to a cable as a P8. I have no idea what Be Quiet is doing. I guess they just want to be different. Okay, well, I guess we're just going to have to relearn all of the standards that only Be Quiet chooses to adopt. And again, their products are good. Their prices are good. But this stuff is infuriating. Now, I realize we can open up the manual and we can look and see what these cables are for. But after 33 years of building computers, why should I have to do that? The only reason is somebody is not following a standard that everybody else is, and it's hindering my ability to do my job and to utilize my experience. So we have 2 connectors here on the back labeled P8, and one goes near the motherboard power. So the motherboard power is split into 2. One's going to go right below that P8 connector. And then, of course, the big one right there on the end. And then we have another P8 connector with no explanation right next to it. But it's a different cable. The end of it's different. I don't get it. You know, I don't see the benefit of that. I only see unnecessary added confusion. For whatever time they think they're saving, it's going to take that much time to research what's going on here than having any sort of conformity along the cables. You know, like everybody else who makes power supplies does. That's just weird. My guess is it's there for a second motherboard power connector. I just wish they would have labeled it as such. It should say CPU on the other end, just like the other one does, and it does not. And so that leads me to some anxiety and concern that there's more to this story, that I might be oversimplifying it, when in fact, it's the opposite. They've overcomplicated it. Frustrates me. To what benefit? How does that benefit anybody? It certainly costs more to package 2 different cables. It would cost them less to give you 2 of the same cable. So I don't understand where there's a benefit there. We're just doing it different. Okay. All right, so screws for the power supply. We can use the screws that came with the power supply, which is always my preference, or we can use the screws that came with the case. With this particular build, the screws are the same. They're exactly identical. Ligrinia posts Be Quiet's explanation of the P8 cable. It'd be nice if it was on the cable. They couldn't have printed that right on the cable, CPU, for example, like they did on the other cable. This one, for some reason, the bigger connector didn't have enough room to write the same amount of text on the smaller cable, but the smaller cable has the text and the bigger cable doesn't. So go to the website and find the documentation and then pull it up and then read it, and then you can figure out where the cable goes. Sorry, man, I just don't get it. Don't get it. Once again, it's a little difficult to get the power supply in without properly being able to hold on to it. I have to grab at it from the one open side we have, and I'm having difficulty getting it aligned properly. If I could reach through on this side and lift it and straighten it and tilt it, this would already be done. Try putting the other screws in first, see if that hole aligns better for us. All the others are going in, but this one. Okay, it seems to be a little stripped out. That's a case design issue, not a Be Quiet power supply issue. Just getting that aligned is a pain, as it would be with any case that doesn't have a removable shroud. And then, as I mentioned, your hard drive tray being that close to the front of the case or to the power supply limits how much space you've got to put your hand in there to hook up your cables. This is not a problem if your power supply is non-modular, but then you're going to have all these extra cables you're not using, and there's really not a place to put them other than inside of the hard drive cage, which you can't do if you're using that. And if you are using it, it's adding even more cables, right? Because you need SATA power as well as SATA data cables here. So I really wish this was moved way over here. I don't see any reason why not. And it does not appear to be movable at all. You can take it out entirely, and then you'll have all this great room in here from here to here for cable management. You could just shove all your cables under the shroud, no one will see them. But if you're going to use 3.5-inch drives, yeah, good luck with your cable management. So the case falls a little short there as well. I would have rather seen this case not come with 3.5-inch drive support. But then you're going to have people complain, how can a case this big not support 3.5-inch drives? Where are they going to put them? Where it doesn't interfere with cable management. They'd have to make the case a little bigger or a little longer. That's going to cost more. And people are willing to pay more if they're getting more, but if you're a non-name brand, if you're not known, why would people pay more for or the same for your product versus a name brand product they're familiar with? And these are these decisions that each company owner has to make to figure out where's the balance between price, usability, quality, where, you know, we're not generating a bad name for ourselves, but at the same time, we also give consumers a reason to try us versus sticking with what they know from the bigger, more established brands with better marketing money, more marketing money. And marketing is a very effective means to sell products here in America. I'll tell you that. If you don't have any marketing, yeah. And that's why a lot of these smaller companies will ask us content creators to make videos for them, because they're not paying for a commercial, they're not paying an advertising agency for graphic design or advertising of pop-ups or, putting it on websites. They're sending a content creator a case for free that obviously costs them less than what they sell it for. So if it's an $80 case, it might cost them 50 or 60 bucks. And in exchange for that, they get a dedicated video that does all the script writing, filming, editing, and polishing to present their product to the audience without the traditional cost that goes into typical marketing. Not only that, it's a highly targeted audience the content creators are appealing to, like I'm appealing to people interested in tech. If it was an ad on the radio, you're just broadcasting to every genre and every category of person, most of which probably have no interest. I mean, how often do you really listen to those ads on the radio or TV commercials? How many of those really impact you? But if you're watching a show about sports and they're promoting sports drinks or sporting goods, it might be more in line, but they still have to guess. With YouTube or other social media, you know exactly who your audience is, and that should cost more. But instead, it costs them next to nothing, which is why you'll see so much of this on YouTube. The only difference is they don't pay us, so that we're free to be critical where it's deserved, in my opinion, and to be independent, so we're not on anybody else's schedule or need anybody's approval. And if they want that, they can pay for it. But that's the business model. And it can be tough sometimes, because the manufacturers, what they really want is a good review. But what ends up happening is if you give them a harsh review, they probably won't send you any more stuff anymore. Because why would they want to damage their, that's not why they're sending it. On the other hand, we're not doing it to cause any damage. We're doing it to help them make a better product. We're saying, as consumers, this is what we want to buy. Now, if you think that's insulting, well, maybe you shouldn't be making products for us. Maybe you should be making products for you and you can buy them. You know what I'm saying? So sometimes our intentions can be misinterpreted, where a marketing company wants an ad, but they've asked for a review. We had one company reach out and ask us to take the video down, and we said, no, we're not taking the video down. And they said, yeah, but the issue that you had, it doesn't, we're a new company, so we're very vulnerable. And the issue we had has been resolved. It no longer is applicable. So would you take the video down? Just, because we're a small company, we can't take a hit like that. And I said, no. I said, what I'd be happy to do is, if you want to send me an updated product and have me, do a follow-up review, I'd be happy to do that. But we're going to keep our integrity and our honesty. And we told you that before we accepted your product, and you didn't pay us, right? We weren't making a commercial. And if you want to quote unquote punish us, right? Not that they said that, but this is what I'm thinking. If you want to punish us by not sending any more product for us to review for you for free, I'm okay with that punishment. Doesn't bother me one bit. There's no shortage of companies reaching out and asking us to review. But it takes a lot of guts or a level of ignorance to even reach out and ask, because you have to understand what a review is. And if you're making a commercial, it's going to cost you a lot more. Like I said, you'll need a proper script. You probably want to hire actors. It'll need to be properly edited. It'll need to be a specific length, because commercials are paid for based on if they're 30 seconds, 15 seconds, a minute. And then you will pay every single time you want to air that commercial. And that is a lot more than the cost of a single product being sent at no cost, for me. And that's part of the business of the nature of what we do. So if I get contributions from you guys and memberships from you guys, I can use that money to just purchase what we want. And we don't deal with the manufacturer. They have no say in it. It's our product. We can review it when we want, how we want, and say what we want with absolutely no repercussions or potential for repercussions. Unless what we say is slanderous or libelous, but we don't do that. We're just being honest and straightforward with no axe to grind. Just raising concerns of what I consider my value system and what I would sell my clients versus what the company's attitude might be. And those may not be an aligned value situation, but neither one of us would necessarily be wrong, and my review would still be valid. A company sends you a product and they say, would you review it? It's not uncommon for a company to then start emailing you daily. Have you done the review yet? Are you planning to do the review soon? Or when's it going to be? Is it going to be today? Have you done it yet? How about now? When you buy the product, they don't know you're any different from any other consumer. So the review, if they're even aware of it, they'll only be aware of it after it airs. Whether or not they like the review, they certainly wouldn't reach out and ask you to take it down because they'd have no way to reach you, right? If they're sending me the product, they have my address, my email, my phone number. If I'm buying the product from Amazon, Amazon has that information. The customer doesn't, not in most cases. So even if they wanted to reach out, they wouldn't know how. I suppose they could leave a comment in the video, but how would I know that's really from them and not somebody pretending to be them? Okay, front port umbilical cables here. Get these out of the way right quick. 1, 2, 3, wasn't there a fourth one? No? Okay, so what am I missing? I've got a power switch, a reset switch, and a hard drive LED. I don't have a power LED? All right, we'll just put these on for right now. Maybe I'm just not seeing it. So let's get these out of the way, and if there is a power LED I'm not seeing, maybe it'll show up here as I start reducing the number of cable choices I have. You know, the same applies with Yelp reviews. I've had clients call me and say, you know, a customer left a Yelp review and Yelp won't remove it. They're the worst people to deal with. And I'm like, that's what makes Yelp good. They shouldn't just remove negative reviews because a company doesn't like it. Well, it's, you know, not right. This customer is completely in the wrong. And I'm like, the best way that you can get rid of that review is to get new reviews that are all positive reviews. So it moves that review down, the negative one, down to page 2, because no one ever clicks on page 2. So it just takes a little bit of time. And when your clients come in, just say, hey, if you wouldn't mind, would you leave us a review on Yelp? And that will push the negative review down with positive ones. And most people aren't reading all the reviews. They're just looking at the top few and the average. You know, how many stars average does this have? Rather than fighting with somebody unreasonable who's trying to punish you. Oh, I think I just found the power LED right here. Okay, so it was there. It was there. So if a company says, hey, you know, we're a small company and we made a mistake and we've corrected it, then send us more product and we'll review it and push the other product further down. So it's less likely going to be seen in the search results. Once it gets pushed down to page 2, very unlikely most people click on page 2. We call that hidden in plain sight. Okay, so that's the power LED. Now we have our USB 3.1. That's going to go, I think, right through here. Yeah, to here. And we have USB 3.0. That's going to go same place pretty much, right through here. Here. And finally, we have our front port audio. That's always going to go somewhere towards the back of the board. And hey, you know what? I was able to get above that power supply okay, despite the shroud being there. And then we also have an ARGB header, which I don't know if this board, yeah, this board supports that. So we'll put this audio plug on, and that's for our front port audio. Like I say, that always goes on a micro ATX and an ATX board on the bottom left side of the board, closest to the rear of the case. And it's just a friction fit. It just slides on. So make sure you push it in all the way. And then our ARGB header looks like it's going to go right next to that, except that's a male and we need a female. Is that a male connector? And even more concerning, why is it behind my motherboard? Did that even happen? So this cable, it's right here, is somehow stuck behind my motherboard, and it should be behind, it should be back here exposed. It should not be between this motherboard tray and the motherboard. That is not good. And I don't even know how that happened. I can't even see it on this side. Where did it come from? That is strange. I wonder if there's a connector back here that I'm missing. There's one way to find out. I'll take this 2.5-inch drive tray out and let's take a peek back there behind the board. See, because it's going up here, it looks normal. Oh, there's no hole cut out here, so we can't see it. I'm wondering if the female ARGB header I need is right there. But I don't understand how that happened, but clearly it happened during the board install. Interesting. Very interesting. This is another limitation of case design where these kind of mistakes simply can't happen with other manufacturers who have more thought out designs so that this could not happen. It's something that people take for granted because they don't think about it. You never had the problem because you couldn't have the problem when you bought your NZXT case. But now you're having problems you've never had before because you bought some lesser known manufacturer that was less money in most cases. And leaves all of these potentials that you would not have otherwise. So if you don't know any better, ignorance is bliss. Now, that's not to say all cheaper cases from lesser known manufacturers would suffer these kinds of consequences, but it's typically found in that design more than, say, from better, bigger known manufacturers. So I'm not going to take the board out right now to loosen this cable because that's going to be a massive pain in the butt. You know what? Maybe it won't be so bad. Let me do it. It's my darn OCD. But, you know, I've got everything cabled up. So I just need to remove enough screws so I can lift the board up by about a centimeter, slide that cable out, and then push the board back down. I didn't know I needed to watch for that. I'm spoiled. I usually work with case manufacturers that make that darn near impossible. No, I think the whole board's got to come out. Something's right there that's keeping us from moving that cable. And I really don't want to have to disconnect all the cables to do it. So I'm going to try seeing if I can leave the cables hooked up and do what I need to do. Just not sure how far I'm going to get here. Yep, there it is. That's exactly what happened. This has a pigtail on it, and the pigtail got caught up under the board. Now, it wouldn't have shorted anything out because the pigtail's all plastic, and it's the female end versus the male end that has the exposed. That's why there's a little dust cover on it. But I had to move the board significantly, but I was able to keep it within the limitations of the length of cable we have. Now, hopefully, when I reinstall it, I'm not trapping a separate other cable somewhere else underneath it. We'll find out here in just a minute. Every other video channel you watch in tech would probably edit all that out, so you would never know they had that frustration or experience, which I think is a massive disservice to all of their viewers. It's effectively lying. It's misrepresentation. And the downside is when you leave that stuff in, people go, why did it take so long? Why didn't you do this faster? Because it's not a commercial. Always having trouble with the last screw. That's Murphy's Law. The last screw won't line up. That means the others I've tightened down have to be loosened so I can wiggle the board. Again, without anything to help guide this board into position, on a cheaper style of case, this is the kind of thing you have to be aware of. And you might have to take the board in and out several times with a cheaper case, if that's what you're accustomed to, from the standards of normal motherboard installation on the bigger brands. Some people may say that's a good thing, right? It sort of breaks the mold of what's normal and keeps you learning. But again, to what advantage? What benefit is there to making it this difficult that you could say, well, that's worth it, you know? If the end result is the same, and all we're doing is taking longer to get there. All right, now I can tighten these back down. Okay. Will I be taking this board back out? Let's find out right now. Now, with the ARGB plug no longer locked in behind the board, you can see there are two here, whereas before we only had one, because this one was stuck behind the motherboard. And that's the one I need to plug into the motherboard so that The motherboard software can control all the RGB for the case fans and the board and any other ARGB item you might be adding to your case to synchronize everything. The RGB will still work without it. It just may be displaying colors in a different pattern or order than the rest of the case. So if you want it all to tie in and synchronize, you need to have them all sharing the controller, which would be the ARGB header. Now, we already know the board works. We've already updated it and test fired it. So we should be able to just plug this in and go. So power, put the switch to off. Plug in power. We can plug in network because we already have the operating system installed. We can plug in our HDMI for video output right there. And again, whoever owns this computer can add their own graphics card to it if they want to. And then we just need a keyboard and a mouse to plug in. So let me grab that. That's why I say it's usually on these builds, it's 2 hours to prep the board and 2 hours to get it installed. Okay. Now, if we weren't filming and I was doing this alone, it probably wouldn't take as long. I wouldn't be stopping to explain myself. But I also would never build a computer with how fast can I build it is irrelevant. It's like, I bet I can eat my dinner faster than you can. Yeah, well, I bet I'll enjoy my dinner fast, much more than you will. I enjoy building PCs, and to do it as quickly as possible is usually the mentality I have with something I don't like. Let's get this over with as soon as possible. So anybody who brags about being able to build a computer fast suggests to me what they're saying is they don't like building computers. Because if you'd liked it, you'd slow down and you would enjoy it. Let's go ahead and hit the power button here. These fans aren't turning. What is going on? I hear the fan on the CPU turning. The rear case fan is turning. Okay, this is interesting. There must be another fan header because some of these fans are turning. So perhaps all 6 fans are not running off the same header. That's good news. And that this heat zone would make sense for these fans, the one in the back and the 3 up top, to all run the same speed together. And then these 2 here would be running on a different header. So let me pull out my glasses and see where and if we have another power connector. Oh, here it is right here. Okay. All right. Very good. Well, I take back what I said earlier. So we have 2 fan headers spreading the load on 6 fans. 4 fans on one, 2 fans on the other. And then that also means that these 2 fans will be running at a different rotation, unrelated to these 3 and additional fan that will all run at the same rotation to themselves. So here is our separate fan header along with another ARGB. Now, in theory, we can connect one ARGB from this set of fans onto the other set of fans. It does not have to go back onto the motherboard, only the power. And we should have a power connector for the fans down here somewhere. I do have one just below the big motherboard power connector. That looks like the closest one for us. You reach that in there. Now, normally you'd want to do this with the computer being powered off. If you have another ARGB header on the board, you can use it, or you can connect the 2 ARGB headers together. Without the ARGB plugged in, the fans do not light up. It looks like, you know, we could move the fan header for power and ARGB up here at the top of the board. They do offer us a second one, it appears. I'll have to get creative on that. I don't think I necessarily need to do that right now. Let's just make sure that we boot it into Windows. So let me go back to my HDMI input, which is right there. Yes, we have booted into Windows. Let's do a shutdown and a restart. It's whisper quiet, so it's good that the fans are quiet. I appreciate that. And let me take a look in the chat room and see what you guys are saying here. Mike Ely with a $25 super chat. Thank you, Mike. Andy Kane says, how many fan headers are on that motherboard? I'm not sure, but the Z490 Aorus Elite is something you can Google, and you can see the layout of the board there. I think there's about 4, but I'm not sure. I haven't really paid that much attention. Alan Lindos with a $7 super chat. Thank you, Alan. Peter VZ with a €1 super chat. Thank you for that. Peter wants to know you can't leave messages. So live interaction, talking to me while I am live in our chat room requires membership. But after the video airs, it'll have a comment section that anybody can leave comments on. And of course, while the video is airing live, anybody can watch it. We're just limiting participation to paying members during live content. Peter VZ says, with €2 super chat, says better to take it apart indeed. Yeah, that's the way we ended up going with that. David Graham with a $2 super chat says, here's for your extra work. Hey, thank you, David. I like the work, don't get me wrong, but when I'm doing a live video and I'm on a 2-hour time budget and things aren't going well, I get a little concerned we're going to run over, and then people complain the video's too long. So, yeah. But such is the case with the new experience. And sometimes those new experiences are smoother than others. Let's see. Paul says, Carey is much nicer than my first boss in the IT industry. If you do everything the way you're supposed to do it, and there's a very good reason why you can't, if you don't, I am 100% on board with you. Mats Olof Rickardson with a 100 Swedish krona contribution. His hello, Carey and Marlena and all. Thank you, Mats Olof, joining us from Sweden. Charles Eslick says hello. A shout out to our friend Buster. He'll usually watch these videos when we're asleep, because when we make the videos, he's often asleep. About 9-hour time difference between us and Scotland. So hello to Buster when you're out there watching. And yeah, I just have to figure out the ARGB location for these 2 fans here. And you can see everything's working like it should. Now, of course, we'll have the link, if we don't already, to part 1 of this video in the video notes below today's video, along with all of the parts we've used today. So this is an older motherboard, 10th gen board, 10850K, but we'll have a link for the cooler we've used, the power supply we used, and the case we've used, because those are all brand new parts. Everything else, we've already done a prep video on this board a couple of years ago when it was brand new. and that G-Skill Trident RAM when that was new and special. It's not so new and special anymore, but the original video for that, if we can find it, we'll add it to the video notes as well, but most of you probably already saw it. Paul Connolly with a $30.99 Australian contribution. Thank you to Paul. Paul says, thanks, Mara and Carey, for the great content. And speaking of Australia, I did hear from Mitch. He gave me a call. He went into the shark cage, and he said even with the wetsuit, that water was freezing cold. And he went first, and apart from seeing a couple of large fish, there were no sharks. And of course, you know, what do? Have a shark whistle? They can't promise you're going to see sharks. And so they were out at sea, and other tourists there on the boat doing the shark cage dive had gone in. And eventually they saw a single shark, not a great white or anything, just a regular old everyday shark all by himself. And people, you're like, yeah, let me in, and go into the cage. And they asked Mitch, you know, do you want to go in now that there's a shark? And Mitch is like, yeah, if there were two sharks, but for one shark, the cage is shaking back and forth, and it's really hard to hold the GoPro, and it's freezing cold. He's like, no. So overall, I think Mitch was disappointed with that experience, but at least he did it, right? How many of us would jump in a cage and, you know, potentially face that? So kudos to him. Even if it didn't work out the way he pictured it in his head, he always knew that was a possibility. He's doing a couple other scheduled things, and hopefully we'll see some pictures from that. It is cold and overcast and rainy. It is winter in Australia. And I said, well, at least you don't have any mosquitoes, right? Because I imagine when it's our winter here in America, it's summertime in December in Australia. And I imagine the mosquitoes come out and it's humid. So I would think the colder, overcast, rainy weather would be more appealing to me living in the desert, right? Because the last thing I want to see is more desert and have more heat. So I think going in the wintertime is a great idea. Paul1961 contributes 20 Canadian dollars. He says, awesome show as always. Thank you, Paul. David Graham says, I won't swim with sharks. Nick Caffrey says, Mitch is fundamentally sane. That's debatable. I mean, he's my friend, isn't he? What does that say? All right, guys. So apart from, as I mentioned, just hooking up the ARGB here on these two fans, we do a little cable management here, which shouldn't be too bad. We can hide a lot of that back behind the case. And then, of course, we've got the, just to kind of picture this, the front glass would go back on like that. Just put one little screw in there so it doesn't fall onto the floor. Now we still have the plastic film covering the glass. Why is that not going on? Is that a different thread type? Okay, so here's another issue. It appears that even though the tops of the screws look the same, they are not the same. These are very shallow, the screw depth, and they're also a lighter black. These, yeah, they're pretty darn close. Maybe I just don't have it straight. Let's see. They are the same. Oh, that one went right in without a fight. So I'm not sure, but there is a difference between these two screws. And while they look the same this way, if I hold them side by side, they look identical, but when I turn them this way, one is really shiny and one is just matte black on the inside. And since we have 4 that are matte black and 2 that are shiny, I'm guessing the 2 that are shiny hold the back panel on, and the 4 that are matte black Um, that's the other thing. The reason why these are matte black, there's a rubber washer, and you want the rubber washer against the glass. You don't want to screw up the screws and put the wrong screws on too tightly and crack the glass, or that there's a vibration because you use the wrong screw. These little tiny details that most people would never ever notice should be pointed out by the manufacturer in big, bold words. I don't know that this says anything about the screws, but you do have, you know, this is telling you this is glass and not plastic, and to handle it up as glass. This will have to get loaded in the car and taken over to the owner of the computer. So I might as well just leave this on for protection. And then when it arrives, we can do the peel. And then I'll put the back panel on, and that's where the other two screws that don't have the rubber on the end, they'll go on the back of the metal here. So again, that kind of information is generally not exposed by the manufacturer. And I don't think they're doing it on purpose. They just don't know any better that these little tiny details can make all the difference in the world. And people are not born inherently knowing to look for that. If you don't look for it, if you're just casually looking, all the screws look the same. And it wouldn't necessarily make the computer unbootable, but the screw may not fit in straight, it might go on crooked, or it could crack the glass. Or you could end up with a vibration sound that's driving you crazy. Hence, manufacturers should assume people buying the case know nothing, or if their case varies from what is the standard, they should at least discuss those things that are different. But if they don't know what the standard is, even the case manufacturer couldn't tell you. Because case manufacturers don't necessarily build computers. If they did, they'd probably make better cases. That's my theory. Paul Connolly says, Carey, the mosquitoes in Sydney are massive in summer. Sharks are much safer. You know, from what I've heard, I hear that's pretty much true. Let's see. Where did I go? Right here. Captain Malinsky says, that's nice, relaxing RGB. Yeah, but not where it... Right here is where you're going to see the most of the RGB, and I don't have that hooked up yet. And I don't know why they didn't hook up all the ARGB to the existing fans already. That part is a little baffling, and here's the problem. Where we've got to hook it up, the cable's very short on both sides. For these fans here in the back to the fan over where I hooked it up down here at the bottom, you know, we got a distance like this with a cable that's that long. So I got to figure out where I can tie them together, either with an extension cable, which you can buy on Amazon, or by hooking the fan up separately to the power connector by the power. It's sort of like the CPU optional fan connector that's up there. Or looking more closely at the board if there is another fan connector close to an ARGB, because the fan power and ARGB are part of the same cable on this design. Or you can spend $100 and replace the fans, which is stupid because that's more than the cost of the entire case with the fans. That's why I say when you're buying your case, don't just look at price. You've got to take into consideration the cable management, power supply shroud, how easy it's going to be to work on, how expandable it is, whether or not it's big enough and deep enough to hold your cooler or your graphics card if you intend to add one. These are all important factors, and hopefully you only have to buy it once. Having to send something this big back is never fun. Putting it back in the box, loading it in the car, even when the shipping and return is free, it's still a hassle because of its size, weight, and just dimensions. So keep that in mind if you're going to buy a case. Do your research, buy it once. So if this case meets your needs and budget, you know what to expect, you should have a great time with it. If this case does not meet your needs and you buy it, you're probably not going to enjoy it too much. This does have the ability to add a video card vertically right here. but you will have to get a separate GPU riser at additional cost. And in doing so, you will block access to the ports behind it, meaning you will not be able to use most of the ports on the motherboard if you block them with your graphics card. People do that strictly for looks. It doesn't offer any advantage whatsoever. And having a big solid piece of glass here is going to restrict the airflow on your graphics card, but it'll look good. So keep that in mind. The slots on the back are 3 slots wide for a vertical GPU mount here. And then you'll place your fans right up against that glass, restricting airflow to your graphics card. So it'll run hot. It will be airflow restricted, but it'll look amazing. To each their own. Also depends on the graphics card. If it's only a 2-slot wide graphics card, then you can move it over closer to the motherboard, not, give it a little space between there and the glass. You'd be better off for cooling to just mount the graphics card horizontally, but it doesn't look as cool. So, pros and cons, little paradox. You want this, you sacrifice that. You want that, you sacrifice this. You want it all, spend more money. All right, guys. Well, thank you all for joining me today and all the members and all of your support. Let me, check the phone. I haven't checked the phone. And then we'll wrap it up. We're right at 2 hours here, so cutting it close. Stuart Johnson sent $6.41 via PayPal. He says, this is from Choppa for the squirrel's nuts. Daryl Loftus with a $25 Amazon gift card. Thank you to Daryl for that contribution. And thank you for all of the super chat contributions from everybody, from Mats Olov, as well as Paul1961, Paul Connolly, David Graham, Peter VZ, Alan Lindas, Mike Ely, Nick Caffrey, Perugian Kalustian, William Denton, Jose Lopez, 3D Everything, Craig Casabona, Gregory Howard, and our first super chat before the show started from Tom Jackson. Thank you guys so much for helping keep us independent so we can continue to do this on a regular basis and continue to bring you a variety of content. We have a few more builds to do that are just left over. I just never got around to them. And I want to get them done before I have to move into Studio C. So hopefully you'll see a few more builds. And before that starts getting old, I hope we'll run out of builds. I just want to get rid of these parts as much as I can. So we have some brand new cases we've never reviewed and a bunch of older prep motherboards that we've already done videos on. A lot of 13500s that were going to go to some business and then ended up the plan changed. So we'll combine those and just do the builds and the reviews on the cases. And then we can get that stuff moved over to Studio C. And then likely you won't see another build for a while, at least maybe not until fall, late fall. I don't plan on doing an AMD 9000 build whatsoever. It's too much money. When 15th gen Intel comes out, maybe, but even then I'm not sure yet. So we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, but those chips aren't released yet. That'll wrap it up for me for today. Thank you, of course, to our friends at Acronis, our friends at RoboForm, and our friends at VIP CDK Deals for offering you guys a 30% discount and free trials on all the software, so you know exactly what to expect, and everything's guaranteed. Customer satisfaction guaranteed. As far as those discounts go, as far as I know, we're running through the end of the year. As a reminder, Mondays are our members-only videos. Tuesday, we'll have Acronis with Begowden on the show. That's all that's scheduled at this point, along with a public video every Friday at 1 o'clock. And then any other day, we'll go live as time permits. Thank you to Maralina for all the work she's doing behind the scenes, all the YouTube administration. And thanks to all of the members and all of the viewers. Without you guys, there'd be no point in having a channel. So we appreciate you. And of course, our friend Buster, Frankie B, Oystein, very generous contributors here that are enabling us to keep moving forward at the same level of momentum, which is fantastic when so many YouTube channels are closing down or in the process of closing down. So we're going to keep going, and hopefully the generosity will remain, and we'll be able to keep going without having to sell our souls to some corporation to make commercials for them. Really don't want to do that. As for the case, I don't know how to summarize this case. It's not great and it's not bad. It's not expensive and it's not cheap. It's not the best and it's not the worst. And if it's good enough for you at a price that you feel is a good value, have at it. For me personally, I would not feel comfortable selling this case to a customer. I think it would be too much work, too much labor involved for me personally. And then replacing those fans would be a pain in the butt because they're sort of a proprietary design as Musetex likes to use. Not to say you can't find them, but they're not standard ordinary fans. With that, you know, as a personal build, would I build it? Sure. But would I sell it to a customer? No. Just isn't up to my standards. But that's me. I have a business to run and a reputation to maintain, and anything I sell to a customer is a reflection on me. If I sell crap, I look like I build crap. If I ship a computer and it costs me $150 to ship that computer, it doesn't matter if that computer is worth $3,000 or $300. The cost to ship it is the same. All right, guys, that'll wrap it up for me. I will see you all again very, very soon. Enjoy your weekend. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. Bye for now.